Welcome to the Compact Murders podcast from compacthistories.com, where we take a look at real murder cases, assassinations and serial killers in short, bite-sized episodes. This is episode 68, The Spy in a Bag. Gareth Williams was born on the 25th of March, 1978 in Barry, South Wales, and from an early age displayed an exceptional aptitude for mathematics. Quiet, intensely private, and academically gifted, he followed a path that led him into some of the most secretive corners of the British intelligence community, a journey that would later complicate every attempt to understand his death. Williams attended Diffrin Comprehensive School before studying mathematics at the University of Manchester, where he graduated with first-class honours. He went on to complete postgraduate study at the University of Cambridge, specialising in number theory. His academic performance marked him out as a rare talent, and he was recruited directly into GCHQ, the UK's Signals Intelligence Agency, where advanced mathematical ability is a core requirement. By all accounts, Williams was regarded as highly capable but reserved. Colleagues later described him as polite, meticulous and socially awkward rather than secretive. He lived alone, had few close relationships, and kept his private life tightly compartmentalised. This tendency toward isolation would later become a point of speculation, but during his career it was not unusual within an environment that prized discretion. In 2009, Williams was temporarily assigned to MI6, Britain's Foreign Intelligence Service, and assigned to work at Vauxhall Cross, MI6's London headquarters. His role involved analysis rather than field operations, focusing on highly sensitive data related to international security threats. The precise nature of his work was never publicly disclosed and remains classified. At the time of his death, Williams was living in a rented flat at 25 Alderney Street, Pimlico, a short distance from MI6 headquarters. The apartment was modest, sparsely furnished, and unremarkable. He had moved in only months earlier. His routine appeared consistent and predictable. He commuted to work, kept mainly to himself, and maintained minimal contact with neighbours. Despite the secrecy surrounding his professional life, there was no indication that Williams was under investigation, facing disciplinary action, or suffering from obvious professional stress. He was regarded as competent and trusted enough to be placed on secondment within MI6, a decision not taken lightly. By the summer of 2010, Gareth Williams was a 32-year-old intelligence analyst with an exceptional academic background and access to classified material, but little visible footprint outside his work. This combination, brilliance paired with privacy, would later make it difficult to separate the man from the speculation that followed his death. Before he became the centre of one of Britain's most puzzling unexplained deaths, Gareth Williams was known primarily for his mind, not his mystery. In early August 2010, colleagues at MI6 began to notice that Gareth Williams had gone quiet. He failed to attend work and did not respond to emails or phone calls, behaviour that stood out in an environment where routine and reliability were taken seriously. Williams was not known for unexplained absences, and his silence quickly prompted concern. Initial checks were cautious. Intelligence work often involved irregular hours, travel and confidentiality, and there was no immediate assumption that something was wrong. But as days passed with no contact, concern hardened into alarm. By the 21st of August, colleagues escalated the matter to the Metropolitan Police, requesting a welfare check at Williams's flat in Pimlico, close to Vauxhall Cross, MI6's headquarters. Officers attended 25 Alderney Street on the 22nd of August 2010. The flat was locked, curtains drawn, and there was no response to knocks. Nothing appeared obviously amiss from the outside, but the lack of contact from a serving intelligence officer raised the stakes. Police returned the following day with a locksmith to gain entry. On the 23rd of August, officers entered the flat. What they found immediately confounded expectations. The apartment was tidy, with no signs of forced entry, struggle, or disorder. There was no indication of burglary, yet Williams was nowhere to be seen. Attention soon turned to the bathroom. Inside the bathtub was a large red holdall bag, padlocked from the outside. When officers opened it, they discovered Williams's naked body inside, curled into a confined position. The keys to the padlock were later reported to have been found inside the bag, beneath his body. The discovery transformed a welfare check into one of the most perplexing death investigations in modern British history. There were no visible injuries on William's body consistent with assault. No blood, no defensive wounds, and no apparent cause of death. The flat itself showed no sign of a third party having been present. Windows were intact, doors were locked. Yet the circumstances were extraordinary. The idea that a grown man could enter a bag, zip it, padlock it from the outside, and die inside strained belief. The fact that Williams worked within the intelligence services only intensified scrutiny. Questions immediately arose about whether his death was accidental, self-inflicted, or the result of external involvement. As news broke, media attention was swift and intense. The phrase "the spy in the bag" took hold almost instantly, shaping public perception before any formal conclusions had been reached. From that moment on, Gareth Williams was no longer just an intelligence analyst who had gone silent. He had become the centre of a mystery defined by absence, contradiction, and a scene that refused to explain itself. The physical facts of the scene inside the Pimlico flat quickly became the centre of the investigation, not because they offered clarity, but because they resisted it. Gareth Williams had been found naked inside a north-face red holdall, measuring approximately 90 centimetres long, secured with a padlock on the outside. The bag was placed neatly in the bathtub, its zipper fully closed. Williams's body was positioned with his knees drawn up toward his chest, his head bent forward, and his arms constrained by the limited space. The posture was tight, but not anatomically impossible. What made the scene extraordinary was not simply that he was inside the bag, but that there was no obvious mechanism by which he could have locked it himself, once fully enclosed. The padlock keys were reportedly found inside the bag, beneath his body. There were no signs of a struggle within the flat. Furniture was undisturbed. No blood or bodily fluids were found outside the bag. Doors and windows showed no evidence of forced entry. From a purely environmental perspective, the apartment appeared sealed, an isolated space with no visible intrusion. Forensic examination of the bag revealed no foreign DNA of evidential value. Fibres and traces were consistent with Williams's own environment and possessions. This absence would later play a central role in arguments against third-party involvement, but at the time it only deepened uncertainty. Intelligence officers and detectives alike were left staring at a scene that implied action, yet refused to show how that action had occurred. The temperature inside the flat added another layer of complexity. The bathroom radiator was found turned up high, and the room itself was unusually warm. Experts later suggested that this heat could have accelerated decomposition, complicating estimates of time of death. It also raised questions about whether the environment had been deliberately altered, though no clear explanation emerged. Notably, there were no visible injuries on Williams's body that suggested restraint, assault, or incapacitation. Toxicology tests would later find no evidence of drugs or poisons at lethal levels. He appeared neither beaten nor chemically subdued. If someone else had placed him in the bag, they had done so without leaving conventional forensic traces. At this stage, investigators faced a significant problem. The physical evidence did not support a straightforward homicide, but it also did not comfortably support an accidental death. The locked holdall sat at the centre of the case like a closed argument, self-contained, silent, and unwilling to explain itself. Whatever had happened to Gareth Williams, it had happened without witnesses, without noise, and without an apparent breach of the space around him. The bag was not just a container for his body. It was the boundary of the mystery itself. As the investigation moved beyond the scene itself, attention turned to whether science could explain what the room would not. Forensic pathologists conducted a full post-mortem on Gareth Williams, but their findings were limited in scope. There were no injuries consistent with violence, no fractures, and no signs of restraint. Toxicology tests detected no drugs or poisons at levels that could explain his death. The cause was recorded as unnatural but not specified. Time of death proved difficult to determine. The bathroom radiator had been turned on high, raising the temperature of the room and accelerating decomposition. This made estimates imprecise, with pathologists placing death anywhere from several days to more than a week before discovery. The uncertainty complicated attempts to correlate Williams's last known movements with a clear timeline. Attention then shifted to the mechanics of the bag itself. Could Williams have entered it alone and secured it from the inside? Police experiments showed that it was physically possible for an adult of his size to climb into the holdall, pull the zipper closed, and contort his body into the position in which he was found. What could not be demonstrated convincingly was how the padlock could have been attached from inside the bag once fully enclosed. Some investigators proposed a sequence in which Williams partially zipped the bag, locked it while his arms were still outside, and then manoeuvred himself fully inside before drawing his limbs in. Others argued that this relied on a degree of dexterity and precision that bordered on implausible, especially given the confined space and lack of rehearsal. The absence of third-party DNA was repeatedly cited as evidence against homicide. Yet forensic specialists cautioned that absence of evidence was not evidence of absence, particularly in a tidy flat where surfaces could have been cleaned or contact minimised. Equally, there was no sign that the scene had been staged. The lack of disturbance cut both ways. Williams' personal habits were also examined. Investigators uncovered evidence that he had an interest in bondage and confinement, including internet searches and rope found elsewhere in the flat. This discovery shifted the tone of the inquiry. It introduced the possibility that the bag was part of a private activity that went catastrophically wrong, rather than a container used by an external actor. By the end of the forensic phase, the investigation had reached an uncomfortable equilibrium. Physics suggested the scenario was not impossible. Forensics could not prove another person was present. Psychology offered a partial explanation, but not a definitive one. Science had narrowed the range of possibilities, but it had not closed the case. Instead, it left investigators facing a conclusion that felt technically viable and emotionally unsatisfying. A death that could be explained in theory but not convincingly reconstructed in reality. The formal attempt to determine how Gareth Williams died took place at a coroner's inquest in December 2012, more than 2 years after his body was discovered. By then, the case had already accumulated layers of speculation, expert disagreement, and public unease. The inquest was tasked not with assigning criminal blame, but with establishing the circumstances of death as clearly as the evidence allowed. Central to the proceedings was the question of whether Williams could have entered and secured the bag himself. Expert witnesses for the Metropolitan Police testified that controlled experiments showed this was physically possible, albeit difficult. They argued that the absence of third-party DNA, the locked and undisturbed flat, and Williams's personal interests together pointed away from homicide. The police position was that there was no evidence of another person being present at the time of death. This interpretation was challenged. Other experts questioned the realism of the reconstruction, particularly the step involving the padlock. They argued that the manoeuvre required to lock the bag from the inside while fully enclosed demanded a level of dexterity that could not be reliably reproduced. The uncertainty surrounding the time of death further weakened attempts to align a self-initiated scenario with Williams's last known activities. The coroner, Dr. Fiona Wilcox, ultimately rejected the police conclusion that Williams had likely died alone. In her ruling, she described the death as unnatural and likely to have been criminally mediated, a carefully worded verdict that stopped short of naming homicide but explicitly challenged the accident theory. She noted that the physical mechanics of the bag remained unresolved and that key questions could not be answered with confidence. Despite this, the inquest did not trigger criminal charges or a public prosecution. Subsequent reviews by the Metropolitan Police reaffirmed their position that there was insufficient evidence to support third-party involvement. In 2024, a further forensic review concluded that no new DNA or physical evidence had emerged to alter that assessment. Alongside the legal process ran a quieter controversy involving secrecy. MI6 acknowledged failures in its handling of Williams's welfare, including delayed action when he went missing and limited cooperation in the early stages of the investigation. In 2012, Williams' family received a formal apology and compensation for these failings, though this addressed procedure rather than the cause of death. By the end of the official processes, the case stood in a rare and uncomfortable position. A coroner had indicated probable criminal involvement. Police maintained there was no proof of it. No further investigative steps were taken that could reconcile those positions. The result was not closure but stalemate, a death officially recognised as unnatural, publicly investigated, repeatedly reviewed, and still resistant to a single, authoritative explanation. More than a decade after his death, Gareth Williams remains a figure suspended between explanation and uncertainty. No criminal charges were ever brought. No definitive cause of death was established. What survives instead is a case that sits uneasily at the intersection of intelligence work, personal privacy, and the limits of public accountability. The intelligence context has always complicated interpretation. Williams was not a field operative, but he worked with highly sensitive material during a secondment to MI6. That fact alone invited speculation about foreign intelligence involvement, retaliation or coercion. Yet no evidence has ever been produced to show that he was targeted because of his work or that classified material was compromised. Reviews by police and security services found no indication that his death had intelligence consequences, a detail often overlooked in more conspiratorial retellings. At the same time, secrecy constrained transparency. Large portions of Williams's professional life remain classified, limiting what could be examined publicly. His family was denied access to certain information during the inquest, and the intelligence service's initial handling of his disappearance raised legitimate criticism. The apology issued to his family in 2012 acknowledged institutional failure, but it did not resolve the central question of how he died. Public debate has often gravitated toward extremes, either espionage, assassination, or tragic accident. The reality is narrower and more uncomfortable. The forensic evidence does not clearly support murder, yet the mechanics of the bag and the coroner's conclusions resist a clear accidental explanation. Each interpretation explains some facts, while leaving others exposed. Williams himself has often been reduced to a symbol, either of Cold War-style intrigue in a modern setting or of misunderstood private behaviour. Both risk flattening the human reality. He was a gifted mathematician, socially isolated, intensely private, and working in a profession that encouraged compartmentalization. Those traits shaped both his life and the investigation that followed his death. The case also raised broader questions about how unexplained deaths are handled when they involve state secrecy. The tension between national security and public scrutiny was never resolved. Police, coroners, and intelligence agencies reached conclusions that coexisted rather than aligned, leaving the public record fractured. Gareth Williams's death did not end with a verdict that satisfied either skeptics or believers. It ended with parallel truths, an official position that no evidence proved third-party involvement, and a judicial finding that the death was likely criminally mediated. Both remain on record. What endures is not a solved mystery but a boundary, a point at which evidence, expertise and authority reached their limits and stopped. The spy in a bag case remains open, not because answers are being actively withheld, but because the facts, as they stand, refuse to close around a single explanation. That brings us to the end of this episode of Compact Murder, part of the Compact Histories Network. If you enjoyed it, please follow or subscribe wherever you're listening so you don't miss any future episodes, and consider leaving a rating or review, as it really helps new listeners find the show. You can find more episodes at compactmurder.com, where you can also explore our other podcasts covering biographies, history, disasters, warfare, and mysteries. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest. Finally, please consider supporting the show directly by buying us a coffee. Head on over to compacthistories.com/murdercoffee to see how. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.